Hi, this is Gary with MACMOST.com. Let me show you how to create a simple spreadsheet in Mac Numbers to help you track your personal or home expenses. MACMOST is brought to you thanks to a great group of more than 1,000 supporters. Go to MACMOST.com/Patreon. There you could read more about it, join us, and get exclusive content and course discounts. So it's fairly simple to track your expenses in a spreadsheet in Numbers. We're not going to get too complex here. I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to use any formulas at all in this tutorial. So first, let's launch Numbers, and I'm going to choose a template here. Now, I'm going to just choose the blank template. We're going to start from scratch. So here's the blank template. Now, Numbers documents are made up of different sheets. You start off with just one sheet here. Think of them as different pages. Inside of each sheet, you can have multiple tables. So here I've got this one sample table that's automatically there in this template. I'm going to use this sample table to create a journal for my expenses. So every time I have a new expense, I record it here. Now, a mistake a lot of people make when trying to record expenses is to separate months or years, have them in different tables or in different sheets. This makes it very hard to do calculations that go over that time period. In other words, if you want to sum up the expenses for several months or several years, but you've got them in different tables. It's important to keep everything in one table. So all of your data is just basically going to be in this database that's this single table on a single sheet here. Don't worry about the fact it's going to cross multiple months and years because we're going to be able to look at individual months and years later on. So I want to get rid of the header column here because it doesn't make sense in this context. Usually this would be for a unique identifier for each row, like each row represented a day or each row represented a inventory item or something like that. We don't have that here because we may have multiple expenses on a given day, and not every expense could have some sort of ID number or something like that. So let's go over to Format and Table in the right sidebar, and I'm going to change the number of header columns to 0. Now I still have a header row here. This is where we identify what each column stands for. So I'm going to make the first one date. The second one, I'm going to have a description for the expense. The third one, I'm going to make this the amount. And then the fourth one, I'm going to make a category. This is our most useful column here, and is really the whole reason for doing this. So we can look at our expenses and see how much we spend, say, on housing or clothing or travel. I'm going to have another column here for miscellaneous things. So notes. So if I want to include a note with any one item, I can do it here. I don't need these two columns, so I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to select Arrange here. And I'm going to click right here, this little down arrow there, and delete selected columns. So now I've just got these. I can resize the columns as well. I probably need a little bit more space for description, so I can grab the line between B and C here at the top. The same thing for notes. I can grab the line to the right of E and make that bigger as well. Let's give this a name. We'll call this Expenses Journal. And we'll do the same thing with the sheet here since the only thing in the sheet is this one table. Now I've got this nice table here and I can start recording things. So for instance, I could record that on January 2nd, 2023, I went grocery shopping and spent $120. I will call this category food, and there are no notes here. Now let's work on these individual columns here. If we select the entire column by clicking on the column letter at the top, we can now go to Format and then Cell and set the format for all the cells in this column. So we'll go and have this be date and time format, and now we can pick what we want here. So we can maybe have it be something like this if we like, or maybe just something like this, whatever it is you're used to. For time, we'll select none. We don't want a specific time here, it's just dates. For column B, we'll just leave it as regular text there. But for column C, we want this to be a dollar amount. So I'm going to go and set that to currency, 2 decimal places. I like a thousand separator in case the numbers get that big. And we've set our currency type. So now if we enter a new number in here, like say 35, notice how it automatically formats it for that. Then for category and notes, we'll leave that just normal automatic so we can type whatever we want in here. So when we enter a row, we want to enter the date a description, and this could be anything that we want. So we can get a little more detailed here. For instance, I could have specified the name of the store, the weeks I was going grocery shopping if I wanted to. I would then put the amount. And then for category, this is where I want to get really selective. The more categories you have, the less you'll be able to use the spreadsheet to look at your expenses. For instance, having dozens of different categories is going to make it hard to figure out what you spend money on. So you want to limit it to a small number. Things like maybe food, housing, clothing, travel, and so on. Maybe keep it to 7 or 10 at most. And you'll see why when we start to process the data later. For now, I'm going to go and enter in a whole bunch of sample data here and fill this table up. So you can see now I've got a ton of data here, stretching over 2 different years. It's not necessarily in order, and it doesn't really have to be. You can put this in any order that you want. But if you want to sort it, say by date, you can click on that little down arrow next to the column letter, and you can do a sort. So I'll sort ascending here. So now it's sorted with the earliest date first. And now this table is sample data, so it simulates what would happen if I had almost 300 rows stretching 2 years worth of data in here. So for keeping track of things, this now works. You can go and look at any specific item here and figure out how much money you spent on that. But chances are you want the spreadsheet because you want to be able to perform calculations, like be able to see how much you spend on food from month to month. There are several ways to do that. One is to create another table and use formulas in that table to calculate things like sum up all of the food expenses from a given date range. Another thing you could do is use filters and categories. So you could go and filter by date and then use categories to filter everything by your column actually called category to see the totals there. But by far the easiest way to do it is just to use pivot tables. So you've got a pivot table button up here. And if you select this table, just any cell in it selected, and you click the pivot table button, it will create a new sheet. And in that new sheet, place a pivot table that links to this table. So let's do that. I'm going to click the pivot table button. So we have a second sheet now. And you can see I've got this table here, but I haven't chosen any options yet. If I look over on the right, it takes me to organize pivot options. And I could see my columns here, date, description, amount, and category. And I could also scroll up here and see that I've got nothing selected for columns, rows, or values. So let's do that. Let's go and say that we want the rows here to be the date. So I'll drag this down. And then let's say we want the columns to be category. So I'll drag this down here. We have no data in the middle because we haven't specified anything to be the values. So let's drag the amounts to values. So now we've got a pivot table that shows us each category at the top and each year here on the left. So we could see, for instance, in 2022, this is how much we spent on food. And in 2023, this is how much we spent on food. Now you may not want everything by year here. Maybe you want it by month. If you look at the rows here, it says date and it automatically chose year because there were multiple years worth of values. If you click the I button there, you could change this so that it's grouped instead of by year. You could say year, month. And now you've got every month of each year in a separate row. So I could see for each month here exactly how much I spent on food. So without creating any formulas, we have this handy pivot table here. As we update and add new items in this journal table here, we can go back to this pivot sheet and let's call it categories by month, like that. And I'll use the same name here for the name of the pivot table. And note that when you do update the expenses, you have to select the table here and click this refresh button up here at the top right. That will bring in the latest data when you've added new rows. Notice you've got some columns here on the right. You've got the grand total. So this is how much you spend each month. And you also have a grand total here at the bottom. So I could see, for instance, that on clothing, this is how much money I spent over those 2 years. I can also filter this. So I could go here with this table selected, go to filter and add a filter and say I want to filter by the date here. And I don't want to select individual dates. Instead, I want to go to date here, select a range. And let's say I only want to look at 2023. So I could do 1/1/2023 to 12/31/2023. And you can see now I only have those months showing. So now I've got a great summary of my expenses for the year. Now you can also create multiple pivot tables. So I'm going to go back to this journal table here, make sure it's selected, and I'm going to create another pivot table. And for this one, I'm going to, in the columns, put the date. And in the rows, I'm going to put the category and then the amounts and values here. So now you can see I've got 2022, 2023 as the two columns, and then it looks at all of the different categories here. So this gives me another way to visualize my data. One last thing I want to show you, if we go back to this categories by month table, I could go to organize filter, and I've got the date range set already, so I could get rid of that with the little trash button there. I could also add another filter here, and let's say I want to filter by category. Notice the default is quick filter, and it gives checkboxes next to each of these. So if I simply wanted to go and remove some of these and just have housing, health, food, and clothing, I could really easily make this quick filter here, and it just shows me those columns. And the totals will match the columns I've selected. So there's a simple way to keep track of your expenses in a spreadsheet in Numbers. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button below to let me know. I publish new tutorials each weekday. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out.